the cell cycle and DNA tools. So as you already know, in case of cells, we have prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cell. So as you all know, in case of eukaryotes, that in case of animals or let's consider humans, we are multicellular organism. So which means that the cell has to divide. So generally what happen is cell single cell divides to make two cells, or subsequently these two cells will divide to make four cells. So we generally call this process as cell cycle. So what is we'll see now the general overview of cell cycle, that what happen in case of cell cycle or how the cells divide. So you must have learned that why cells needs to divide itself, because we already know if we are single cell, to form the entire human body, these cells has to divide. So these cells will divide. So the generally these cells follows the cycle that I will discuss now. So in case of cell cycle, generally most of the cells are present in interphase, and when cell has to divide, it enters into the mitosis and it will divide. So interphase is the part of the cell cycle which takes more time. So in case of interphase, we have the G1 phase, S phase and the G2 phase, and there is a G0 phase. So when the cell is not dividing, cells is remain in case of G0 state. So the some cells that divide slowly or not at all exist in the G1 phase that enters into the G0 phase, which is a resting phase. Mostly our nerve cells or liver cells are present are in the G0 stage. So first phase, that is the G1 phase, we called it as a gap phase 1. So in case of gap phase 1, cell will prepare itself for the replication. It will form all the necessary components that are required for the replication, and after the G1 phase, it will enter into the S phase. So S phase is very important. So in last tutorial we have discussed that we have the DNA as one of the micromolecule. So this DNA is replicated in this S phase, and S phase is also called as a synthesis phase, because this is the period during which DNA synthesis occur. So G1 phase, it prepare all the components which are necessary for replication. Then in S phase, DNA replication will occur, and then cell will enter into the gap phase 2. So this is the gap phase 2 is a gap period following DNA replication and like before the M phase to start. So after the G2 phase, cell will enter into the M phase. So M phase is a very important phase. This is a phase where the cell divide into the two cells. So in M phase, we have different steps that are there. So cell will first start with the prophase. So you already know about the chromosome. So you must be heard about the chromosome. So in case of the G2 to prophase phase, in prophase phase, this chromosome get condensed or get proper chromosome like structures, that is it form in case of prophase. After prophase, cell will enters into the metaphase, then anaphase, then telophase, and then cytokinesis. We'll explain this each step in the subsequent slides. So in case of cytokinesis, if we see, the cells are dividing and our DNA content is get divided into the two cells equally, and we'll get the two daughter cells. So from one cell we are forming the two daughter cells, and again these two daughter cells will divide to form the four cells, and then subsequent procedures will happen. So the most important side is this. So in case of cell, as I explained here, we have mitosis is one type of cell dividing, or other one type is a meiosis. So what is difference between mitosis division and the meiosis division? We'll start with the mitosis first. So as I already explained, we have the G1 phase, S phase and G2 phase, and then cell will enter into the mitotic phase. So in case of mitosis, we'll start with the prophase. In prophase, we are getting the duplicated chromosome. What does this mean? Consider you have the 23 pairs of chromosome, which means you have the 46 chromosome. This 46 chromosome will duplicate in and then enters into the prophase. After the prophase, there is a stage called as metaphase. So as I said, we have the two pair of each chromosome. So each chromosome has its copy. So one copy is come from parental side, one copy is from the maternal side. So we have the two sets for each chromosome. So this homologous, which we known as homologous chromosome. Homologous chromosomes are those chromosomes which carries same set of genes. difference is that one part of chromosome will come from parental side, one part will come from the maternal side. So we have the two sets of each chromosome. Now this chromosome will align one like this, and then this chromosome will separated in case of anaphase, and then in the subsequent phase we get the two divide cells which contains of 46 chromosomes, which means 23 pairs of chromosome. Then what is the difference between meiosis and mitosis then? So, should I continue? Anyone has any doubt? Okay, I will continue then. So this slide is very important. If you understand this slide, you can, it's better to, easy to understand other slides. So in case of mitosis, as we learn the how the mitosis happens, we have prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. So mitosis is usually occurs in the somatic cells. So somatic cells are all the cell except your gametic cells, because somatic cells are diploid. What diploid term means? Diploid terms means you have the two sets of each chromosome. So that is the diploid condition. So all your somatic cell, consider any cells in your body except gametic cells are somatic cells. So in case of diploid cell, we start with the 46 chromosome, then cell will divide and form two cells, and these two cells also contain 46 chromosome. So we start with the 46 chromosome and end with the 46 chromosome only. That is in case of mitosis. And these two cells that are forming, that are genetically identical, because this 46 chromosome get divides, and then each daughter cell will contain all these 46 chromosome. That's why they are genetically identical. Then what is different in meiosis then? In meiosis we have two steps. One is meiosis 1 and the meiosis 2. So what is happening in case of meiosis is, as I said earlier, we have the homologous chromosomes. Just look at these two chromosomes. So these two chromosomes are homologous chromosomes. That means they are carrying same set of genes. Now in case of mitosis, if you see, these chromosomes are aligned one by one, right? But in case of meiosis 1, the step called as metaphase 1, these homologous pair of chromosomes are lined up. Like pair is lined up, not one by one. This is the major difference. So the pair of homologous chromosome line up in case of metaphase, and then this homologous chromosome get first divide. This cell will having this set of chromosome, this cell will be having this set of chromosome. So first homologous cell will divide in first case. So that is in case of meiosis 1. Now in case of meiosis 2, these sister chromatids that are there, like one chromosome is made up of sister chromatids. So what are these sister chromatids? This is one sister chromatid, this is one sister chromatid. This will form one chromosome. This is one sister chromatid, this one is sister chromatid, this is second chromosome. So now this sister chromatids get divided like this. So actually meiosis 2 is same like a mitosis, where sister chromatids gets differentiated. But what is main thing is, now in this case this homologous chromosome get divided. So because of that, our 23 pairs of chromosome is now divided into two. So the 46 chromosome has now become the 23 chromosomes. So our cells are now having only 23 chromosomes. So in this case we are forming the haploid cell. Major difference, remember here, in case of mitosis, one cell has a 46 chromosome, but in case of meiosis, at the end one cell be having only 23 chromosome, which means only half set of chromosome. So that is in case of meiosis. So remember this. And this genetically different daughter cell. Why they are genetically different? Because one cell is getting, consider this is from parental side or this is from the paternal side, when they are getting the different types of genetic material. So this indicates that these two cells are genetically different in case of meiosis. So at the end, what is the general outcome from this slide is, in mitosis we are getting genetically identical daughter cells, and they contain 46 chromosomes. While in case of meiosis, they are not genetically identical and they are having only 23 chromosomes. Okay. Now the next slide. So this is a general experiment, and which is very important. So why do there are do molecular signals in the cytoplasm regulate the cell cycle or not? So as you know that any animal cell or human body is complex. So this is cell cycle is not like must be happening randomly, right? There must be some control or regulatory element must be there. So this is one standard experiment that has been performed. So in case of experiment 1, what they did was, as I explained, we have the G1 phase, S phase and the G2 phase. So when they fuse these two cells, like the S phase cell was fused with the cell which is in the G1 phase, means that S phase cells is actually replicating, right? And G1 phase cell, it is preparing for replication. This two cell scenario is different, okay? So when they fuse these two cells, what happened was, these cells also start going into the S phase. So why this is happening, that we will discuss. So when a cell in S phase was fused with the cell in G1 phase, the G1 nucleus immediately entered into the S phase, that is DNA was synthesized. Second experiment what they did was, they fuse M phase cell with that of G1 phase. So what is in M phase? M phase means cells is dividing, that is mitosis is happening. And G1 phase, cell is just preparing for replication. So even in this case, when M phase cells is fused with the G1 phase cell, this G1 phase cell start dividing directly. It just skip all the step and it just start dividing, which means from G1 phase is directly entered into the M phase by skipping S phase and the G2 phase. So this indicates that fusing G1 cells with the S phase or M phase of the cell cycle suggests that there are some molecules that are present in this S phase or M phase that control the progression of these phases. So what are these molecules? These molecules are called as checkpoints. So this is also a very important slide. So consider your cell is in G1 phase. So if we want that cell is want to enter into the S phase, there are some checkpoints or controls that are present that will activate these cells to enter into the S phase, and those proteins are called as cyclin proteins and cyclin dependent kinases. So in case of this, consider G1 checkpoints that are there. The cells is in G1 checkpoint. It's want to enter into the S phase. So for G1 phase to start, these checkpoints are for decide the cell size, growth factor. If it is a DNA damage is there, then cell will not divide. These checkpoints will inhibit cells to divide if there is a DNA damage present in that stage. Second, we have the G2 checkpoint. This is for the cell size or DNA, if there is any problem in DNA replication. If cell identify there is any problem in S phase that was happened, then in G2 phase it will prohibit cell for the enters into the mitosis to enters the into the cell cycle or division step, because if that faulty cell get divided, it will be harmful for the body. And then the M cell checkpoint is for chromosome attachment to the spindle. What does this mean? If your chromosome should be properly segregated. If it is not properly segregated, there is a case of mutations or various cellular level mutation that will be happening. So sir, cell will avoid this these checkpoints will avoid cell to get divided. So these checkpoints are present at each step that will ensure that cell all the replication or chromosome segregation has been happened properly. If cell is done properly all these stages, then it will undergo mitosis and divide. So what happens if this checkpoint not working? So what is the stage that is happening in case of cancer? So how cancer occur? So mostly when cell divide, as you already know, cancer is the uncontrolled division of cells. So obviously there must be either fault in the checkpoint controls, that why cells is dividing continuously. So cancer cell actually do not respond normally to cell cycle or control system. They just divide indefinitely. So cancer cell, so what is the problem with the cancer is that cancer are two types. One cancer cell is benign, which is located to the particular position, while the another cancer type that is there, that are metastasis. They are just from one part of the body can goes to the another part of the body where they start dividing. So that is called as metastasis of cancer. So in case of benign tumor, it start with the abnormal cell remain at the original site. So that is consider if consider one person has a breast cancer. So in case of benign tumor, it will locate at this one side and remain at that side only. So that is benign tumor. But while in case of malignant tumor, cell spread from one tissue to the next tissue and then impair the function of one or more organs. That is the malignant tumor. Like in this case, it start in the breast, but then cancer invade the neighboring tissue, and from the circulation or from the lymphatic vessel, it has traveled to the all the parts of the body, and that is become metastasis tumor. So the small percent of cancer can metastasis to another part of the body. That's why the checkpoint controls are very important. Okay, but in case of cancer cell, they are not working. Cell are just dividing independently. Next slide is not. Okay. So we'll discuss the question. So the first question is very important. A cell with the diploid number of 16. Remember this, diploid number of 16 means cell total has 16 chromosome. As I said, in case of human we have 46 chromosome, that is diploid case. So in case of diploid number of 16, which means cells total has 16 chromosome, consider 8 from one parent, 8 from another parent. This is just a hypothetical. Then how many chromosomes there are there in each daughter cell at the end of meiosis 1 and at the meiosis 2? Let's see.
Vinanti,
Yes.
I guess Mehul has a question. So would you wait and take the question now, or you
Yes,
want
yes, yes. Now only. Yes, Mehul.
Mehul, unmute yourself, please? Mehul, you have raised your hand. Could you unmute yourself?
Hello,
Yes.
hello.
You're audible, Mehul. Please continue.
Hello.
Yes, Mehul, your question, please.
Or you can just type your question in chat box. That is also fine. Okay, till then I will continue, right? Okay. So consider cell has a 16 chromosome total. 2x means 2 into 8. That is 16 chromosome. So what will happen in meiosis 1? So as I said, in case of meiosis 1, the cell DNA content is divided into the half. So obviously these 16 cells will divide, that homologous chromosome will get segregated and will get 8 chromosomes. That is 8. That is, oh sorry. So in case of meiosis 1, we have the total 8 chromosome in one cell, 8 chromosome in another cell. Then in meiosis 2, as I said, meiosis 2 is same like mitosis. So in mitosis, there is no reduction in the chromosome number. This is very important. In meiosis 1, there is a reduction of the chromosome number happening, but in meiosis 2, as it is same like mitosis, there is no reduction in the chromosome number. So the 8 chromosome will remain the same and we'll get the 8 chromosome in a daughter cell. So if we have the 16 chromosome in a parent cell, it will divide into the two daughter cell in meiosis 1, where it get 8 chromosome in each cell, and then these two cells is further divided in meiosis 2. We form the 4 cells, and these 4 cells will also have 8 chromosome in them. Okay, so this is one question. Second question is, a cell having 48 chromosome undergoes mitotic division. Discuss about the chromosome number and the DNA content during the 5 phases of cell cycle. So as I said, in case of meiosis, the chromosome number gets half, but in case of mitosis, the chromosome number will remain same. So you must be knowing this question, answer of this question. So as I said, in case of mitosis, we have prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Interphase is the stage which contains all the phases: G1 phase, S phase, and G2 phase. These 3 stages is come into interphase, and the mitosis is a different stage which consists of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So obviously, if we have the 2 chromosomes, these 2 chromosomes will replicate in S phase. That's why the chromosome number become. this chromosome will enter into the prophase where they form the chromosome construction that I said earlier. This will happen in case of prophase. So the your chromosome number will remain same, that is 2, and the DNA content is still 4C over here. Okay. Then it enters into the metaphase where these chromosomes these chromosomes and its sister chromatic gets separated like this, and still there is a DNA content as a 4C, and the number of chromosomes will remain same, that is 2. Now in case of anaphase, this look into this, the sister chromatids gets like separated because the cell has to divide or divide equally the genetic material into the two cells. So in case of anaphase, the chromosome as two sister chromatids get separated in this, we have the DNA content has become 4C, and the chromosome number is also become 4. So from the interphase to the anaphase, the DNA content will remain same, that is 4C. But now, because till then that cells is considered it's one only, but in telophase this will divide into 2. So obviously this 4C will become 2C. So in case of this mitosis, we'll start with the 2 cells, total number of chromosome 2 will end with the total number of chromosome 2 only. And also remember, you will say then what is this 4C and 2C then? This is 4C because in interphase cell has divide, so that DNA content become duplicated. But before this cell only has 2C only. But as it replicated, it become 4C. So till the division, it will again divide and form the 2C, 2C. So DNA content will remain same, and the chromosome number also remains same in case of mitosis. Now, this is another question. This is also same question. How many chromatids does diploid body cell contain just prior to cell division? So as I said earlier, our body has a 23 pair of chromosome, that is total 46 chromatids. As DNA get replicated, as I am explaining in earlier slide, it will become 46 chromosome only, but as DNA is replicated, it become 92 chromatids, because this one and this one will count this, right? So will become 92 chromatids. Then cell will undergo mitosis and will get diploid cell, which consists of 23 pairs of chromosome, 23 pair of chromosome, 46 chromosomes and 46 chromatids. Chromatids means this part, only this. So this is one sister chromatid, this is one sister chromatid. So like that we have 46 chromatids. Then this is another question. So what do you infer from the statement? Meiosis enables the conservation of specific chromosome number of each species, even though the process actually reduction in actually result in reduction of chromosome number. So what does this question means? This question means, as I already explained, your all somatic cells are undergoes mitosis, but your gametic cells are undergoes meiosis. So which means that your gametic cells is actually containing only haploid sets of chromosome, only 23 chromosome, while all other your body cells contains 46 chromosome. So your egg cell is contains only 23 chromosome because that is haploid. Your sperm cell will be consisting only haploid sets chromosome, that is 23. So this 23 from the egg cell will fuse with the 23 from the sperm cell and will get a total 46 chromosome. So just remember, if meiosis is not happening, what will happen? Because if we fuse 46 with 46 and we get number of chromosome, that condition is ploidy, which means more number of chromosome. So that is not happening. So this is how nature is actually conserving, that is meiosis is actually important process because it's conserving the specific chromosome number for each species. So that is for at the end the zygote or embryo that will be forming, which will be having 46 chromosome. Okay. Then there is there is certain number of time the mitosis happen. This is very obvious question. So yes, actually in our if you see the chromosome, at the end of every chromosome there are telomeres. These are actually a repeating units that are present at the end of chromosome. So when your cell divide, which means it is replicating, right? So at every stage of replication, it start losing some part of its DNA. So in case of after some point of time, like let's say after 50 to 70 times of division, cell will stop dividing. So this is how it is not possible, right? If cells is dividing indefinitely. That is in case of cancerous cells. So in case of cancerous cell, there is an enzyme known as telomerase get activated. So in cancer cell, if this is like get shortened at every replication, this will form again. So that's why they are dividing indefinitely. But in case of normal cell, we don't have that enzyme. So in case our telomeres get short, and then after some times of division, cell will not divide. So this is how our body controls cell division. Then how you must be remember about stem cells. So how do stem cells maintain their own population if the cells are dividing and then stopping, but we have the stem cells, right? So how they divide? So in case of stem cell, one stem cell is divided into the stem cell divide into the another stem cells and the precursor cell, which means what? This stem cell will make one copy of itself. So that's how it is maintaining its own population. So this is one stem cell, and then there is it from the precursor cell. Then this precursor cell will differentiate into the different types of cell. But this stem cell is actually preserving its one copy. So a stem cell is divided into firstly another stem cell and another precursor cell. So this is how two stem cells are maintaining its population. This is the last question. So can the nucleus from differentiated animal cell direct the development of the organism? So what does this question mean? So in this, they have this frog egg cell that is there. This nucleus is anucleated, which doesn't have any nucleus. So they have taken cell from frog embryo, which means their cells are still dividing the entire organism that form, right? So when these cells is fused with this anucleated egg cell, they are able to form the entire tadpole, that is most developed from tadpoles. But when they taken the cell from the tadpole itself, that is fully differentiated cell, and then they fuse with this enucleated egg cell, they were just able to form sub ball like structure, or the just cells of just developing before tadpole cells. These are not able to differentiate and form entire tadpole. So they have taken the cell from the tadpole itself and then they fuse, but they were not able to get entire tadpole again. This is why, because this nucleus from differentiated frog cell can direct the development of the tadpole. However, this ability to, like, these cells have all the contents that are there to form the entire organism, but this cell is actually completely differentiated cell, so it doesn't have all the signals that are there which is to form the entire tadpole. So because of that, this indicates that for entirely differentiated cell cannot be able to form into the different organism, like one organism altogether. So this is the difference between the undifferentiated cell or less differentiated cell and the fully differentiated cell. So this part will be explained by Debag. Yeah. Should I stop sharing or will just continue?
Yeah, I will share.
Okay, okay. Just a minute.
Vinanti,
Yeah.
some of them might have follow-up questions in the chat box, and some of them.
Okay, I will respond to them. Right.
Okay. Okay, slides are visible?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So we would be covering the recombinant DNA technology and PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and the subsequent primer designs through DNA tools. So the last class did include aspects on nucleic acids, what are the different types of nitrogenous bases and how they are labeled, like AT, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. So everybody remembers?
Yes.
Okay. So the recombinant DNA technology is actually one of the major boons that molecular biology has provided basic sciences with. So through this, we can actually ensure that a gene of interest can be placed into a specific vector, and that specific gene could be expressed in terms of the translated protein. So the translated protein will actually tell us, or will actually help us identify characteristics associated with functions, interactions, or their role in even diseases. So we are aware of the fact that proteins are translated from genes, right? From replication, transcription, translation from the last class. I hope people remember that. And based on that, we have a gene donor from which gives us the gene of interest or the isolated gene, and a plasmid donor which gives us the specific bacterial plasmid to be taken into consideration. The bacterial plasmid to be taken into consideration depends on the gene of interest, the type, the molecular weight, and how many molecular weight refers to the total number of base pairs which are isolated in the identified protein, I mean identified gene of interest. So the plasmid in this case is generally opened up with a restriction enzyme which has specific tags and knows where to cut the plasmid. The cut, the restriction enzyme mediated cut over the plasmid allows the isolated gene to be introduced into the plasmid, forming the recombinant DNA molecule. The recombinant DNA molecule with is actually brought together or fused together with the isolated gene through the DNA ligase. And if we utilize or transform this recombinant DNA molecule into a specific medium, in this case bacteria, we can probably translate the same gene of interest into a protein product. So the plasmid donor in this case could actually include any bacteria, any insect, or even in certain cases, mm, uh, viruses. So taking this into consideration, the provided bacterial plasmid actually can sustain itself inside the specific plasmid donor, which in general cases is E. coli. So given the specific conditions to E. coli to grow and LB media, so we find the translation of the specific gene of interest into the specific protein product. So, going into how the plasmid actually acts as a cloning vector. So, bacteria carries accessory DNA molecules in addition to the genetic material, obviously. And as you can see here, we have taken into consideration an example cloning vector, that is PUC19. Now, PUC19 has several sites which are identifiable to different restriction endonucleases, as is in this case EcoR1. So EcoR1 would actually carry out or cleave the cloning vector to generate some space to allow for the gene to be inserted in this region. So I mean, transforming this same cloning vector post ligation will actually help translate the gene which has been introduced into the protein necessary. In labs, that is how proteins are generally purified in most cases. So if you have a protein of interest and want to study the same, you will have to start from and want to purify it. So you will have to start from the gene of interest and the specific cloning
Debarga,
steps. Yes.
just 1 minute. I guess Krishna has some question. Krishna and Jagmeet Singh, you can ask.
Sure.
मेरा सुनाई दे रहा हूँ ना?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
हाँ, तो मेरा एक्चुअली में पहले था, वो जो दीदी है ना, तो दीदी ने वो बोला था कि जैसे क्रोमोसोम होते हैं, उसी के वो ऊपर ही ऊपर कुछ ब्लैक कलर का था उस वाली स्लाइड में, और वो टाइम के
Telomeres.
साथ, हाँ, तो वो टाइम के साथ साथ कम होता जाता है ना?
Yes, yes.
हाँ, तो इसकी वजह से अपनी एजिंग होती है क्या? मतलब अगर वो खत्म हो गया तो फिर सेल डिवाइड नहीं करेगी और ऐसे अपन मर जाएंगे, ऐसा होता है क्या?
No, aging is not that process कि टीलोमर्स खत्म हो गए और हम मर जाएंगे.
नहीं,
Aging
वो
is
आपने कहा था कि हाँ, मतलब
yes, yes.
टीलोमर्स कम होते जाते हैं, तो वो अपनी मतलब उससे और एजिंग
See,
का वहाँ
this
पे दिखा रहा था कुछ।
that is happening in one cell, but your other cells are dividing, right?
हाँ,
So like every day your skin loses some cells, right? But new cells are
हाँ,
being formed. So you cannot die like that. So you, like if one cell is uh, mar raha hai, then there is other cells that are dividing. So we are getting cells. That is, we are continuously dividing. Every day our cells divide.
नहीं
So
तो फिर वहाँ पे
aging is the
एजिंग,
stage where cell is just stop dividing. That cell will become dead. So most of our cells start going into the death phase. So that's why aging
नहीं,
happens.
हाँ, नहीं तो वहाँ पे कुछ एजिंग का लिखा हुआ था, तो इसका जो टीलो जो भी बोल रहे हैं आप, इसका और एजिंग का कोई अपने आप में रिश्ता नहीं है।
Aging, that have to go through. I will answer your question. Give me 2 minutes. Thank you.
Any follow-up questions again?
Excuse me. I
Yes.
wanted to ask what exactly is a plasmid? We have been mentioning it in the class as well as here, but
Okay. So, in a layman term, we know that every organism contains DNA molecules, right?
yes.
So, in addition to the DNA molecules which constitute the nucleic acid constituents of any organism and possibly the genetic traits that could be passed on from one organism to another and actually represents whether an organism is a bacteria or an archaea or something else, right? So, in addition to these, there are specific genetic materials which are known as plasmids. So, plasmids are available within bacteria and they can be shifted from one bacteria to say another. And at the same time, within bacteria itself, plasmids confer different types of additional functions. So if there is a bacteria which is resistant to ampicillin, there could be another bacteria which is resistant to say tetracycline, which is another antibiotic. And say you bacteria one, that is the ampicillin resistant bacteria, interacts or comes in contact with the tetracycline resistant bacteria, then the transfer of the plasmid from the tetracycline resistant bacteria could actually confer tetracycline and ampicillin resistance across the other bacteria. So these plasmids, they can be shifted from organism to another, and that is why these plasmids could actually be utilized as a cloning vector, can be spliced open, can be utilized to introduce another gene of interest, and can be edited to have maybe even different antibiotic resistance also. At the same time, it ensures that the gene of interest which is encoded inside will help us translate the plasmid to be incorporated into a specific bacterial culture so that all bacteria have that plasmid, and on given certain conditions, temperature conditions as well as nutrient media, they will be generating the they will be translating the gene of interest to produce our proteins. And in certain specific cases such as antibiotic resistance, if you're aware of such terms, so antibiotic resistance generally is based upon the sensitivity of a bacteria in the presence of antibiotic. So say you're a bacteria in water and that water body was suddenly influxed with antibiotics from a pharmaceutical factory. So that bacteria came in contact with that antibiotic. So this might result in a decline in the population of the bacteria, but at the same time, there could be some bacteria that could survive. Now they would survive only because they have certain plasmids with sensitivity, with resistance to that specific antibiotic. Shifting of these plasmids from one bacteria to another confers certain types of fitness, which makes them uh, viable in certain harsh conditions that exist across water bodies or even wastewater treatment plants. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes.
All right, Vinanti,
Yes.
I will be moving on then.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So vectors can be used to amplify 16S RNA genes to identify individual microbial species. So if you intend to identify a certain microbial species or how it is different, as we know that the genetic material actually indicates what type of species it is. So that will help us identify the different types of microbial species that are being taken in context, say in an experiment. Say you took a soil sample, isolated the DNAs from the soil sample itself, and using 16, I mean, based on the 16S RNA genes which are available, how we'll know, how we use it through PCR, we'll know. So we can identify the individual microbial species based on the base pairs that are available in the genome sequence. cDNA libraries can be determined, and genes that have been expressed at a particular time could be identified. At the same time, genomic libraries could also be set up to sequence different organisms. So, say you have an unknown organism, and an unknown organism has an unknown nucleic acid or entire genome, and to identify what the genome sequence is, we will have to sequence it. So how do you sequence an entire organism of say 2000 and 20,000 base pairs? So 20,000 base pairs would obviously involve, you cannot start and finish at the same time. So you will have to create genomic libraries comprising of shorter sequences of this entire 20,000 base pair sequence, and that will help you sequence individual parts and at the same time generate a genomic library for better understanding and comparison as to the hierarchy or the taxonomy of the organism concerned. Multiple clone libraries can also be created to conduct metagenomic studies on the basis of these samplings that are done from water bodies or soil samples. So, how do we cut these plasmids to ensure that they fit a specific insert of a corresponding size? So an insert will have a corresponding size, right? We know what the insert should be based on the translation of a specific gene into a protein. So we have to create or accommodate certain number of base pairs within the plasmid itself. So that is mediated by restriction enzymes. Different types of restriction enzymes have been labeled here, and in each case we find that they have a specific site of action. So restriction enzyme which goes by the name of ALU1 would actually cleave at a site which lies between AG and CT. Like these specific sequences would ensure that the restriction endonuclease would cleave only at that site. Now each of these restriction enzymes have actually been extracted from a specific organism, which in these cases have been based upon the names which have been taken, like HIN3 or even EcoR or BAUM-H. So these indicate the organism which has been taken from, followed by the type of endonuclease. So 1, 2, 3. So EcoR1 could also be another restriction endonuclease would go by the name of EcoR2, 3, and so on. And each of these specific restriction endonucleases would have a different site where they would cut. So assuming this is a sequence, a genome sequence with a specific site of AGCT specific for say ALU1, and that would ensure cleaving of the genome at this specific site, generating sticky ends in either case. Now the sticky ends would actually help accommodate treated DNA duplex with the help of ligase enzymes, which we mentioned that post introduction of the insert gene at this site, the entire thing is brought together or glued together with the help of ligase enzymes. Make sense? Okay. So coming to examples of DNA recombinant technology, we have human insulin production. I assume everyone knows what insulin is, why insulin is important.
Devarga, 1 minute.
Yes.
Krishna, do you have some question? Krishna Rathi.
था उसके आगे भी एक और था मेरा ऐसे.
Sorry.
हेलो, आवाज सुनाई रही है?
हाँ हाँ.
मतलब वो वाला वो वाला हो गया क्या? और इसके आगे भी एक और था मेरा।
Yes, yes.
हाँ तो बोलूँ क्वेश्चन दूसरा वाला?
हाँ हाँ
हाँ तो मैं ये सोच रहा था कि जैसे कि अपना जो न्यूक्लियस है, तो अपन मरते क्यों हैं? ताकि अपने जो सेल होते हैं वो डिवाइड करना बंद कर देते हैं, है ना?
Okay. Your name is?
कृष्णा राठी।
So Rathi, we will take you up on your questions at the end of the class because I guess this is associated with telomeres
yes.
and aging.
Or you can just write it in chat box.
नहीं बाद में पूछना।
Is that all right?
हाँ।
Okay, thank you, Rathi. Okay, so I assume everyone knows why we need insulin. Insulin is actually a viable treatment for people afflicted with diabetes. And why we need insulin is because the person afflicted with diabetes generally does not or no longer has the capability to generate insulin to induce a normal glycemic condition within the body. So generally insulin is injected in the afflicted patient, and in this case we would be learning how this takes place. Since insulin is a protein comprising of two different chains, chain A and chain B. Chain A has 21 amino acid residues and chain B has 30 amino acid residues, and in each case, as we know, that the protein translated would have a gene sequence encoding for this. So the gene sequence encoding for chain A is actually introduced into a plasmid, and in each case, say for chain A as well as for chain B, so the genes are inserted next to a highly expressed gene for beta galactosidase to ensure that that the bacteria actually recommends the production of just the insulin gene and no other protein of that specific bacteria. The plasmid introduced is transformed into an E. coli with recombinant expression vectors and selected transgenic cells by antibiotic resistance. So we would know which type of antibiotic resistance is conferred by the specific plasmid cell taken into consideration, and the chain A of insulin and chain B of insulin are subsequently introduced as gene sequences in the specific E. coli cells through their plasmids. After that, based on specific tagging and or through purification of the fusion proteins, we find that each of the different proteins are isolated, and then by using certain chemical methods that generally require sulfonation of the two chains, as insulin molecules are prevalent as disulfide linkages between chain A and chain B. So the combined polypeptides are then what is generated or what is translated from the encoded gene to produce functional insulin. Is that all right? So how do we visualize nucleic acids? Like we are cutting nucleic acids, we are inserting a new gene. How do we know whether or not the insert has actually taken place? How do we know whether or not the cut by restriction endonuclease has actually worked? So all of that visualization is actually done through an agarose gel electrophoresis. So agarose gel comprises of uh, this gel which is made up of agar and is mixed with a specific buffer, either TAE, trisacetic acid EDTA, or TBE, trisboric acid EDTA. So these buffers would actually, in the presence of the agar, on being heated, would create a gel upon cooling. So all we do, we take agarose, add it with a specific buffer of a specific concentration to ensure that the base pair that we are taking into consideration are actually visualized, and on cooling in presence of uh, on cooling in presence of a electric field, we find that the nucleic acids transverse and at the same time generate a specific molecular weight indicating as to whether or not a specific plasmid, a gene of interest has been introduced into a plasmid or the other way around. So how do we do that? So there are certain wells on the agarose gel on which we load our plasmid or say just the gene of interest with some sort of loading dye. So as we know, nucleic acids are supposed to be negatively charged. So they will transverse from negative to positive charge on the application of an electric field. Also, say the gene of insert is of a specific number of base pairs, say 20 base pairs, and your plasmid, which was excised with restriction endonucleases, is of 180 base pairs. So a 20 base pair would actually come up pretty lower on the agarose gel electrophoresis, whereas the excised plasmid without the insert gene would come up a bit higher because it is 180 base pairs in size, and the overall, that is the inserted gene inside the plasmid, would have a base pair of 200 base pairs, which would come up even higher. So this would actually give an indication of whether or not the excised plasmid donor is actually accepting the insert gene or not, helping us to to move ahead with ligation experiments. Does that make sense? So from a hypothetical gel image of single and double digest of a plasmid, construct the final vector map. So herein we have been given 5 different lanes. So in 5 different lanes, there are 5 different samples which have been given of the varying sizes. As can anyone point out what is the highest molecular weight which has been indicated in this gel image? Can anyone see the highest number in this gel image? Okay, I guess people are still confused with agarose gel electrophoresis. We are still we are still accepting questions. So either way.
They have answered like 1,000.
Okay, very well. So the highest band here is of 1,000 base pairs, which is generally corresponding to a molecular ladder that we use in certain cases. The molecular ladder has not been included in this case, so we will just take a hypothetical numbering assignment. So Z has 1,000 base pairs. So I believe that this is the highest molecular weight of the plasmid taken into consideration. Now, as we have seen that plasmids in each case and in each image has actually been a circular construct. So if you cut it with a restriction endonuclease, with just a single restriction endonuclease, it would lead to the generation of a linear strand. So from a circle, it would actually become a planar line. And that planar line would actually comprise of base pairs corresponding to a molecular weight of 1,000. And the other partners, that is X and Y, would obviously be lying all across that plasmid length. So the difference between X and Z would actually correspond to the distance from point Z on the plasmid, while at the same time the difference between Y and Z or even X and Y would actually point out to the presence of Y between X and Z or the other way around. So how would this generally see? Once again, this is a hypothetical image of the final vector map. So assuming you have Z point here, which once clipped would actually indicate a linear line. So going from 1,000 base pairs and finding the difference between Y and Z would actually indicate how far Z and Y are located. At the same time, the difference between X and Z would actually indicate how far X and Z or easily X or Y are located. All right. Okay. So we have a plasmid of 5 kilo base pairs and which has sites for 3 different restriction enzymes, N3, EcoR1 and CO1, what will the pattern of DNA bands actually look on a agarose gel when digested with one of the 2 pairs? So Hen3 and EcoR1. So this is the plasmid construct, and we see that it has sites for Hen3, EcoR1 and NCO1. So when we use Hen3, it will lead to cleaving of this circular construct into how many parts? 1, 2 and 3. I mean, just Hen3 would lead to 2 parts, and just using EcoR1 would lead to 1 part. So using both Hen3 and EcoR1 would actually lead to 3 different bands corresponding to the sites upon the plasmid where they are being cut, inclusive of the overall remainder of the plasmid that is left. So utilizing Hen3 and NCO1 would obviously give a similar number of bands again, indicating 3 patterns in each case as is suggested here. So corresponding to the size, we have our site at EcoR1 would actually correspond to a 1.5 kb fragment in the middle. Then with your Hen3 site would actually correspond to a 0.5 kb site at the end based on the molecular weight of the different fragments, and the remainder, that is 2.5 and 0.5, which corresponds to 3 kb of the plasmid left. If you actually follow up with Hen3 and NCO1, you would see the corresponding NCO1 site leads to a 0.5 kb fragment. Then you have Hen3 sites which corresponds to a 2.5, a 2 kb site, and the remainder of the plasmid which corresponds to a 2.5 kb band pair. So as is prevalent from the bands, the higher molecular weight stays up, and the lower molecular weight stays down, as is equivalent in any agarose gel electrophoresis. At the same time, the DNA ladders which help us correspond to each of these sizes are given on the left. Alright, so based on the restriction sites that are prevalent in case of a plasmid, in this case we have taken 2 different restriction endonucleases, Hen3 and BAMH1. They have identified the Hen3 restriction site as to where it cuts on the genome, and for BAMH1 where it cuts. As you can see that in each case they are different sites, or the site where they cleave is a different point. So how does this work? Or say this was a complete plasmid, you utilized your restriction endonucleases. So for Hen3, that will generate a site which is prevalent from AGCTT going on to G, that is in the middle, and leave a site which is A and GATCC. I hope everyone follows. Okay, so following that, we have our BAMH1 restriction site which follows at leaves behind a G, and includes our CCTAG tag at the other end, while at the same time it includes the Hen3 restriction site from the 3' to 5' location. So the strand which is on the top is indicative of the 5' to 3' location, 5' to 3', and the one below is indicative of the 3' to 5' location. So the Hen3 site and the BAMH1 site, the places they cut would actually involve a strand which corresponds to the sequences remaining after the cut, that is AGCTT and just G in this end, whereas it leaves the remaining portions like A and GATCC on the 5' to 3' strand. At the same time, if you look below from the 3' to the 5', we have TTCGA which is left, and G from the BAMH1 restriction site, while at the same time the portions from A and CCTAG are included, are carried over. So Based on this, how will you actually recognize or place both of these together to form a ligated plasmid? So based on the restriction sites, you can easily find what would be left on the plasmid and what would be carried over by the excised endonuclease. And at the same time, you can reconstruct the framework of the plasmid taken in this case. So now we'll be moving on to polymerase chain reaction. So we know that restriction endonucleases are actually capable of excising at a specific location. And these locations could be numerous locations based on the specificity of the considered restriction endonuclease. So if it actually cuts at a site AA, so there could be numerous sites which could represent a AA, and that would lead to numerous number of fragments. So having numerous number of fragments would actually not help you identify any specific region across a genome sequence. So how do you go about doing that? We use a PCR. So a PCR is generally a photocopying machine. Has anyone actually seen a PCR machine? No? Okay. So a PCR machine would actually be associated with molecular photocopying and is used to amplify a target DNA sequence to obtain multiple copies of the same. So what actually goes inside a PCR machine? First of all, you must have a PCR tube, because obviously they are of a specific size, and that is where all the ingredients go in. The first thing which you must have is a DNA sample, a Taq polymerase, the specific primers, and nucleotides. And all of this would be made available through a mixed buffer. So a DNA sample is basically the sample which is which is the genome sequence taken in this case. There would be primers which would identify sites across the DNA sample or the area which is supposed to be photocopied. Then you have your Taq polymerase, which will help make copies of the specific genome region in presence of certain deoxynucleotides like DC, DG, DA, DT in order to make the efficient number of copies in presence of a mixed buffer. So the primary step involves the denaturing of the PCR cycle. The denaturing of the primary DNA sample. So as we know, DNA samples are double-stranded. So the strands would separate in the primary step at a higher temperature, 95 degrees Celsius. This is followed by the primers actually binding across the region of DNA at a lower temperature of 55 degrees Celsius. This is termed as annealing. Post annealing, we have our extension, which takes place in the presence of Taq polymerase and the prevalent deoxynucleotides at a lower temperature of 72 degrees Celsius. And this allows for the synthesis of a new strand, which when visualized in a agarose gel electrophoresis would correspond to the specific base pairs that we are looking for based on the molecular weight. So the person involved, Kary Mullis, was given the Nobel Prize for the polymerase chain reaction. At the same time, Kary Mullis was actually an employee at a private firm, Roche, and he came across this idea while he was driving to home from office. While at the same time, this polymerase chain reaction right now looks like a smaller machine, but initially when it started off, each of these steps were carried out and different hot water baths corresponding to the temperatures it is associated with, right? As of today, all we need is a PCR tube and a thermocycler to carry out this entire process. But earlier on, it comprised of 5 different water baths where one would have to place the tubes with the water baths corresponding to a specific temperature to carry out the different steps. So what are the primers? So how do the primers actually identify the site over the over the DNA sample, and how do they actually bind to those regions only. So we have a template sequence, that is a DNA sample comprising of 5-2, the double strands, so which are obviously separated into two different strands. So in this case, we'll only consider one part of the template, and as you can see, say you need to take a region which is harboring our template sequence between from GAT to GATG. So as we know, the base pairs and their complementarity are based upon AT and GC. So a template sequence with a base pair corresponding to D would have a primer sequence corresponding to C, and vice versa, as is in the case of for a base pair T, we would have a corresponding base pair A on the primer. So based on the base pair complementarity of the template, the primer can actually be designed across the same length, and this would ensure that post denaturation of the DNA sample, the primers would act upon the DNA sample and ensure that it binds to the complementary site over the sample. So as we know, the complementarity is because of hydrogen bonding or non-covalent interactions between the base pairs associated. So this will ensure that the primers would actually specifically bind to only that site and no other site, unless there could be issues with the complementarity of the site sequence. So perhaps if the same genome sequence contains multiple sites subscribing to the same genome sequence, then the primer would have trouble differentiating between these sites and we might get a wrong copy. But the same can be verified through an agarose gel electrophoresis corresponding to the molecular weight that we are capturing. So what is important when we generally design a primer? As you know, the annealing is carried out at a lower temperature from 95 to 55, and that is the only important aspect to ensure that the primers actually bind to your DNA sequence. So how is that melting temperature or annealing temperature reduced? Now that is based upon the ATGC sequence that is prevalent in the primer design itself. So if you have a sequence which is corresponding to these many base pairs, so based on 2 times of the number of adenosines and thymine, whereas 4 times of guanine and cytosine would actually give you the melting temperature of the primer. The annealing temperature would actually depend upon the melting temperature with a difference of 5 either way. So if your TM actually comes up to be 64 degrees Celsius, based on the number of A plus T base pairs and G plus C base pairs that are available in your primer sequence, that comes to a 64, and on the annealing temperature would generally vary by decreasing it by 5 units each time. So if you are asked questions upon primer melting temperature, annealing temperature, I hope all you have to do is look at the primer sequence, follow it up with the number of AT and GC base pairs it has and calculate. Alright. At the same time, if you are given a template of a specific composition and you are asked to design a primer, all you have to do is check between which region that the region you're supposed to photocopy or the region you're supposed to make copies of lies, and take the neighboring regions, take the neighboring base pairs as your site of primer annealing. So based on the sequences, you will be designing a complementary primer. So more on that would actually include, say we have a sequence which stretches from 5' to 3', and you are supposed to design 15 base primers in each case. So In this case, you need to have a forward primer and a reverse primer. So based on the double stranded nature and how the double stranded nature which post denaturation is actually divided into a linear strand. So we find that a forward primer would obviously go from a 5' direction to a 3' direction, involving the complementary sites upon the genome sequence, that is C for G, C for G, T for A, and you will have to go along that for 15, based on the number of base pairs you actually need in your primer or is as directed by the question. So you can have primers which are of 15 base pair in length or more, while at the same time, if this is the forward primer, you would also require a reverse primer, which is corresponding to the DNA template, but from the other way around. So anything corresponding, you all you'd have to do is prepare complementary base pairs, and based on that, you will have to all you have to do is create, reverse the entire complementary sequence to prepare your reverse primer. So the forward primer goes in as it is based on the base pair complementarity. For the reverse primer, all you have to do is take it from the other way around. That is from, instead of starting from GGC, you will start from TCC. All right, and hence the name reverse primer and not the forward primer. So the forward primer is straightforward, take the base pair complementarity and go as it is. For reverse primer, you will have to go from the other way around and initiate from the end rather than the start. Okay. So in forensics, PCR applications have been utilized to detect crime. So at a crime site, you have a sample, and from the sample you extract the DNA, run a electrophoresis, gel electrophoresis, and you find out the size it corresponds to. Now you have three different suspects. You take their DNA samples. You take their samples and then extract the DNA, run the same on an electrophoresis, agarose gel electrophoresis, and check the corresponding markers and which one of these actually match the DNA from the crime scene. So can anyone point as to which suspect could be the possible
Suspect 3.
So I guess it is not exactly always as easy as this, but then again, extracting the DNA from the sample holds the key in each case, and DNA isolation is a tool which is necessary in this aspect. So the crime scene DNA contained a single band of 200 base pairs. So for suspect 1, 2, and 3, as we can see, suspect 1 has a 300 base pair allele. Suspect 2 has heterozygous bands, that is 2 bands corresponding to 200 and 300 each, whereas suspect 3 has the complementary band which corresponds to the DNA from the crime scene. Okay, so how many of you have got their RT-PCR done during COVID-19? I guess many. I hope not many of you. But at the same time, if you have got your COVID-19 testing done, so you would know it generally involves an RT-PCR test. So why an RT-PCR test and why not just a PCR test? The reason is, in a PCR sample, the necessary sample is a DNA sample, right? That is your template or your query strand. So in our case, in case of COVID-19 is not a DNA, does not include a genetic material which is DNA. It includes a genetic material which is RNA. So that would involve the reverse transcriptase, the reverse transcription of the RNA into a specific complementary DNA to check through PCR whether or not the genome sequence contains the viral genome sequence. So COVID-19 is a RNA disease. So we use reverse transcription to convert the RNA genome into a cDNA in an afflicted patient. Now, using RT-PCR through a specific dye, say in this case, one can use CyberGreen. So CyberGreen is actually a dye which, when attached, which goes and binds to the site complementarity, which goes and binds to the site complementary to the viral sequence. So the probe in this case goes and binds to the viral sequence, and the DNA polymerase that is generally used in the RT-PCR sequence when it arrives upon the probe would obviously lead to quenching of the dye and emission of a signal. So if the probe goes and binds, it will generally lead to a positive signal and give a value which is inducive of a qPCR, which is uh, representative of a qPCR cycle. Whereas if it does not, if the dye is not released upon verification by the DNA polymerase, it would lead to a negative result. So that is how the RT-PCR application is carried out. So basically PCRs have different types of spin-offs. RT-PCR is one of those spin-offs where you can use a RNA sample to verify or to make multiple copies of the same. Whereas at the same time you have a simple PCR also which involves just a thermocycler, and in certain cases you also have certain quantitative PCRs which will help quantify the number of copies actually made. At the same time, if people remember, we were using different temperatures for denaturing, handling, and extension. And if primers are actually able to bind at 55 degrees Celsius, that is they have a TM at 55, then why would they be functional at 95 degrees Celsius, right? So perhaps they would denature or perhaps they would degrade at 95 degrees Celsius. Or at the same time, if you're actually putting up a PCR with multiple samples in a PCR machine, so once you add the Taq polymerase and the primers, reaction initiates at that instance only. But by the time you reach your last sample, that would have a different, the reaction inside that would obviously start at a later period than the first sample. So in order to ensure that each and every one of the samples get a homogeneous time scale for reaction, another spin-off of PCR is used. So PCR machines have been developed and they have a varied number of spin-offs that Kary Mullis did not think about. And apart from that, the final question would be, how many DNA molecules will you get at the end of 18 cycles of PCR? So when you go to the Xerox shop, you actually make copies of the page. So you know how many pages you have, or how many copies you need, how many friends you have to give your copies to. So at the same time, if you are doing 18 cycles of PCR, so how many DNA molecules at the end of that many cycles would you get? It would actually depend upon a simple formula of 2 to the power n. So all you have to do is raise 2 to the number of copies or cycles of PCR that you are running, and that would give you the number of DNA molecules that you will have at the end. All right. Okay, so we have one thing left. How to use retroviral vector for gene therapy? So as I mentioned that we were using plasmids from bacteria to carry out gene therapy, or to carry out recombinant DNA technology. So gene therapy is a subset of recombinant DNA technology, wherein you can actually use a virus as a tool and ensure that the gene of interest is actually introduced into a vector. And as we know that the virus can infect the individual or the host in this case. So utilizing the fact that the virus can infect the host, we are introducing a gene of interest into the vector to ensure that the host, when infected, would obviously be producing the same protein that is necessary in this case for gene therapy. So gene therapy, I guess people are aware that gene therapy has been in the news for reasons that it does not have effects which is complementary for other drugs, for drugs or any other immunotherapeutic option. So gene therapy can actually be insured, can actually be introduced into a patient to ensure that the patient is not afflicted with the viral vector taken into context, and instead would be injected, on injection of the retroviral vector into the bone marrow. It would ensure that the proteins that are necessary or ensure the therapy in this context would be generated inside the afflicted patient, allowing the multiple copies of the protein to be present in the person and ensuring therapy. Okay, so I guess that is it, and I believe we have extended our timeline as well. I hope people are still awake. Okay, so I've been asked to remind you people that questions in the quiz would obviously include questions from PCR as well, and you are supposed to be like, you should know about the different steps of PCR. You should know where and how a complementary primer can be made. So I hope everyone has taken interest in those slides. At the same time, the slides will be shared. Please go through them. If you have questions, we would be happy to look into the same. Use the Teams platform for the same. Viranti?
Yes.
कैंसर वाला नहीं पढ़ाओगे? ये जो सर ने कैंसर पढ़ाया था
Cancer?
नहीं,
Slide?
वो क्लास में, हाँ वो सर ने क्लास में कुछ कैंसर से रिलेटेड भी पढ़ाया था ना?
Okay. So you have questions on that?
नहीं वो पढ़ूंगा फिर क्वेश्चन हो।
ठीक है, एक सेकंड रुक जाओ. Alright. So this is the slide we have used to explain cancer to you.
नहीं सर ने तो बहुत सारा पढ़ाया था, एक एक्सपेरिमेंट भी पढ़ाया था जिसमें आवाज भी बहुत ज्यादा कट रही थी और समझ में भी नहीं आता कुछ।
अच्छा. So do you have any specific question, or have you gone through the recorded lecture on the same topic which is made available on YouTube?
रिकॉर्डेड आया ही नहीं अभी तक तो, क्योंकि अभी लेक्चर तक तो नहीं आया था, वो कराते ही नहीं, वो 2 तो 3 दिन लेट कर लेते हैं ऐसे तो क्या।
Okay, we'll convey this to the head team.
खाना बाकी सब में तो उसी दिन आ जाते हैं। तो मैं ये पूछ रहा था कि
हाँ।
हाँ, जैसे अपन ने पहले में पढ़ा था, आपने पढ़ाया था कि जो कैबेज का और हमारा डीएनए होता है 60% सेम हो जाता है और इंसानों में 99% सेम हो जाता है।
हाँ।
है ना? तो मैं ये बोल रहा था कि जैसे वही एजिंग वाला कॉन्सेप्ट बोल रहा हूँ, जैसे टॉर्टोटाइज और अपना जो होगा, टॉर्टोटाइज जो होते हैं वो करीबन 250 से 300 साल जी लेते हैं और अपन जो होते हैं वो भी 60-70 तो जी लेते हैं। तो अपन में भी सिमिलरिटीज तो बहुत होगी। तो वो क्योंकि न्यूक्लियस जो होता है, मतलब जो अपनी मेन बेसिक तो सेल ही है, तो अपना जो भी डिपेंड करेगा वो सब कुछ सेल पे करेगा। सेल में भी न्यूक्लियस ही है, उसमें भी डीएनए है। तो अपनी जो एजिंग का कॉन्सेप्ट वो भी उसमें अपने डीएनए में ही होगा। उसका डीएनए ऐसा मॉडिफाइड होगा कि वो ज्यादा जिए और अपना ऐसा होगा कि वो कम। और सर ने पढ़ाया तो इतना याद नहीं मेरे को, लेकिन सर ने बोला था कि अपन डिकोड कर सकते हैं डीएनए को। हेलो?
हाँ.
है ना? तो अपन क्या करें, मतलब उनका भी डिकोड कर